I was running an H1 buffer in this rifle build, but now that I've got a suppressor on it and it's a traditional, baffle stack suppressor, we're changing it to an H2 and we're gonna see how that feels. Welcome back to Sawtooth Tactical. In the ongoing series about shooting suppressed and answering questions that people might have about shooting suppressed, the last video we did about this was about mounting systems specifically. Today's video is about tuning your buffer for suppressed shooting, and that is very important. I have had to tune the buffers and springs in some of these platforms to shoot suppressed and some not, and we'll explain why for each. But generally, you're probably going to have to go up in buffer weight depending what kind of suppressor you have though. So if that's interesting, make sure you're subscribed. And we're going to talk all about tuning your buffer for suppressed shooting. The H2 buffer makes a very big difference. It's still gassy, but the recoil impulse is super soft. And it locks back. It is very easy to get an AR-15 to run reliably, but it takes a little bit more if you want it to run perfectly, to have the perfect recoil impulse, to make sure that it locks back every time on empty, to make sure that you have a good ejection pattern and just that the rifle feels good. And then when you're running suppressed, to make sure that you're not constantly getting just gassed out. And so the main thing that we're going to talk about today is buffer tuning with a traditional baffle stack can. And the reason why, just to get it out of the way right away, is like this 11.5 inch. I've ran that a bunch with the Huxworks Flow 556K. Now that's a flow through suppressor, and it barely adds more back pressure in the system. I didn't have to do anything with the buffer weight or the spring when I was running that flow through can. And that is one of the benefits of flow through suppressors, is that they're kind of just plug and play. You can put them on your gun and it's pretty much going to run the same way it did before, just quieter. Well, if you have more of a traditional can like this OCL Polonium K here, if you just want to have the most enjoyable shooting experience that you can, you're going to want to do some buffer tuning. So let's get started here. This rifle, when I first put it together, I put it together with the Geissele Super 42 H2. Now the Super 42, if you can see here, it has a braided wire spring, which is actually a little bit stiffer than your standard carbine buffer spring. And an H2 buffer I thought was going to be the right weight for this rifle, but it turns out that it was a little bit too heavy. The Roscoe barrel that I used has a very small gas port, and with a mid-length gas system, it just wasn't enough gas to get it to run perfectly reliably and lock back on the last round. I was sometimes, getting ejection but not feeding the next round. Things like that, double feeds even. And so I took the H2 buffer and I switched out one of the tungsten weights with a steel weight, effectively making it an H1 buffer. And then this rifle ran perfectly. Well, that was until I got my Polonium K approved. And of course, you add another thing to your system and it's going to change things up. A suppressor, one of the main things that it does is it adds back pressure into your system. It traps those hot expanding gases that would be coming out of your bore. And instead of all of them just coming out of the front freely, a lot of those gases go back into the system, which makes your gun dirtier, but it also makes it cycle more violently. I'd like to thank Aura, which is the sponsor of this video. Firearms can protect you and your family and your household from a lot of threats and provide you with a certain amount of security, Well, Aura can provide you with security from the things that you don't see and protect you from those threats. I've been using it for a few months now. When I first got it, I Googled my name and there was a lot of stuff that came up. And then I signed up with Aura and I watched as they took each and every one of those things off of the internet so that my information wasn't out there anymore. They do a lot of things, including identity and credit monitoring, password manager, antivirus protection. They have a VPN, home title monitoring, and then the big one is data broker removal. As you guys probably already know, scammers are a huge part of life now, which really sucks. But the way that they get your information is from data brokers. And Aura goes out there and they find those data brokers that have your information and they submit opt-out requests on your behalf, removing your information off the internet so that scammers don't have access to you anymore. The big thing that it's helped me with is I don't get spam calls anymore, and I've noticed that over these last few months that I've been using it. I just have stopped getting spam calls. If you want to support this channel, Sawtooth Tactical, the best way to do that is to sign up for Aura. You get 2 weeks free if you use my link, which is aura.com/sawtooth-tactical. And then it's only $12 a month for all of those things that I listed earlier. I really appreciate what Aura has done for the channel. And I appreciate that they sponsor firearms related channels. It says a lot to me about who they are. I value my privacy and I also value yours. Tuning your buffer to run suppressed has a couple of major advantages. One being that you increase the lock time of the bolt in the chamber, which decreases the amount of gas that's going to come back and hit you in the face. But two, it also decreases your recoil impulse. This gun shoots so soft with the correct buffer weight. So what I noticed with the H1 now buffer that I had in this is that, the first time I took it out with this can, I didn't do anything to it because I wanted to see how it was going to react to the suppressor. And then I would know where to go from there. And that's kind of the thing about tuning your buffer is that you have to have some kind of baseline and then you can know if you need to tune up or down. And we're going to talk about other things because I actually had to tune one of them down or up, depending how you look at it. I actually had to reduce the buffer weight when I started running suppressed. But that's 300 blackout subs, and that is a totally different animal. But 5.56 is supersonic no matter what. There's a lot of pressure behind that little round. And when you add a suppressor, there's more pressure coming into your system. So when I first took this out to shoot with the can the first time, my ejection was way forward and the rifle had a little bit more recoil than it did before. And a suppressor really should help reduce recoil. So I knew that I had to do something about that. So all I did, literally this simple. And with a lot of guns, you could probably make it this simple. If you're running an H1, make it an H2 if you're unsuppressed. If your gun runs perfectly with an H2, add the suppressor, maybe you want to make it an H3. And we're going to talk about which guns would use those kind of weights generally. Now, everything is going to be a little bit unique. Every gun is its own system, but these are general rules that you should be able to go off of to at least get really close, if not right on. So this gun ran perfectly with an H1 unsuppressed. Today, I made it back to an H2, and it was so good. And it does a couple things for you when you increase that suppressor weight. For one, the recoil impulse just softened way out. This thing barely moved when I shot it today with the suppressor, which is really, really nice. With the mid-length gas system, Geisley Super 42 with the H2 buffer weight and the suppressor on it, this thing is so soft shooting. But for two, when I first took it out with the H1 buffer in it, it was very, very gassy. And that's one of the things about the Polonium K. It's a very quiet suppressor for its size and for its price, but it is a very gassy suppressor. It is definitely not a low back pressure can. I mean, you can see just how small the bore in the end of the suppressor is, and this is not a flow through can. And so I was getting a lot of gas that first time shooting it with the H1. Well, taking it back out today with the H2 buffer, I noticed that gas a lot less. And the big reason for that is because with a little bit more weight, you increase your lock time as far as your bolt being locked into your chamber before it, turns, unlocks, and cycles. And that little bit of extra time lets more gas escape out the front and less gas to come back into your face, which makes shooting suppressed just a lot more pleasurable. The Otter Creek Labs Polonium K is just the cherry on top of this build. It feels so good to shoot now. But let's talk about some other platforms real quick. So when I first got the suppressor for my 300 Blackout, I was running this gun unsuppressed and I was only shooting supers because there's no point, in my opinion, in wasting expensive subs without a suppressor. And I was running that same Geissele Super 42 H2 buffer and it was running perfectly reliably. Well, I added the can, and of course, then I started shooting subsonic ammo because it's kind of the point of 300 Blackout. When it's suppressed subs, you can get it very quiet, which is really nice. But subsonic ammo has less of a powder charge behind it. It has less pressure to cycle your system. So I actually had to totally change up the buffer in this, and instead of going heavier like I did with my 5.56 gun there, I actually went lighter. I went with a 3-ounce carbine buffer and a Springco yellow spring, which is their reduced power spring, to be able to get this thing to reliably cycle subs. And it still feels pretty good with supers. So depending what you're suppressing, whether it's 300 Blackout or 5.56 or even 9mm, you might do different things. Now with the 9mm gun, I didn't have to do anything. It's already running a very heavy buffer and a very stiff spring. And so adding the suppressor, it was perfectly fine with what was in it. Now, I want to talk about different lengths of guns and gas systems and what weights you might want to run if you're running suppressed. The Mark 18 that I'm building right now in the current build series, this gun will probably get, again, I do like the Geissele Super 42 braided system. For one, you don't hear that twang, and it's just a very reliable system if you get the buffer weight right. With the Mark 18, it's got a very short barrel, it's got a carbine length gas system, very short dwell time, and a big gas port. And so with this, I'm going to be running an H3 buffer. Now, I haven't shot it yet because the gun's not finished. I don't even have a lower at this point. Although I could put it on this SBR lower and go shoot it right now if I wanted to. But I would change out the buffer if I was going to an H3 buffer because I'm going to run this full-time suppressed with this Polonium K. If I was going to run this unsuppressed, I'd run it with an H2 buffer. So a very short gun, like a 10.3 or an 11.5, H2 is probably good unsuppressed. H3 is probably what you want suppressed. Now, there are going to be exceptions to that, I am sure. You get to something a little bit longer, like a 14.5 or a 16 inch, and you probably want an H1 unsuppressed and an H2 suppressed. So this Geissele Super 42, this actually came out of this gun this morning before I went shooting. This is the one that I changed to an H1 buffer. So I'm going to change it back to an H2 and put it back in this gun. And then that way, both of my longer 5.56 guns will have H2 buffers for running suppressed now. Tuning your buffer weight in your rifle is very important, but it's that much more important when you're running suppressed if you want to have an enjoyable shooting experience. This has made a huge difference compared to the way that this rifle felt suppressed the first time I took it out. The recoil impulse of this rifle now is so good, and it's a lot less gassy. It's nice. I'm probably going to have to increase the buffer weight in my 11.5 inch as well. And that one might be an H2 or an H3. I'm probably going to have to play around with it a little. I'm going to have to figure out what's in it. I think it's just a standard H buffer right now. It was a PSA 11.5 inch AR pistol that I got years ago. It's been totally changed up by now. It's got tons of different parts, different bolt carrier group even in it. But that one, I'm going to have to find out if it wants an H2 or an H3. It's probably going to like an H3, just like this Mark 18, but we will see. And so that is one thing that you're going to have to think about if, a lot of people are getting suppressors for the first time right now. With the short wait times, so many people are jumping on the suppressor train, and I think that that is a very good thing. But the thing is that depending what kind of suppressor you get, you might have to do a little bit of tuning to your rifle. And that's not a bad thing. You don't have to. You can just thread the suppressor on and shoot it, but you're gonna have a better time shooting if you tune your gun to your suppressor. And literally, probably all that it takes is increasing your buffer weight by like 1. So again, if you're running an H1 and you have your recoil impulse and your ejection and everything just tuned perfectly, if you add a traditional baffle suppressor to it, you probably want to run an H2. If you're running an H2 unsuppressed, you probably want to make it an H3. But again, if you're using a flow-through suppressor, you might just want to keep it how it is, because flow-through cans don't really add a whole lot of more back pressure to your system. And so if you do go up in buffer weight, you might end up with an unreliable gun. So I hope this video gave you guys some good information to go with. These are all things, that I have had to learn as I've gone along. And part of the thing with this channel is that, I can pass the things that I've learned on to you guys. Things that I've learned through mistakes, through trial and error, and through experience. And so I really hope that this helps. If you did enjoy this video, please give me a like. Make sure you subscribe to Sawtooth Tactical. And from Sawtooth Tactical, stay strapped to get clapped.